Hey, Shalom here, Duvid. Again, gonna do an Ask the Rabbi. Looks like no one's waiting. I have some stuff to present, and some of this will be answering questions that people have been asking in the chat to relate to the JF debate, and just stuff that I wanted to get on my channel anyways, and haven't had the chance. And so I'm gonna stream. If there's people who come on, good. I'll take questions in the chat, and if not, I will just present my data and be done with that. So I guess no one's here right now. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of Zionism, history of Zionism, and then I'm going to look into some Haredi anti-Zionism and the Haavara, the transfer agreement relating to World War II and the connection between, God forbid, the agreement between Nazi Germany and the early Zionist and the formation of Israel. Very important stuff. People have been asking me a lot of questions about it. This is pretty basic. There's more research, could be more in detail. I give people some resources. But I'll put this as an Ask the Rabbi because people have been filling my chat and other videos with these questions, and I kind of prefer to keep things separately because I add table of contents and timestamps to my videos and want to have them topicked and analyzed, and hopefully other people will be able to watch them back at later times and they'll be relatively organized. So I just don't have a bunch of mixed topics according to everything. So let me enter a screen share while I got very few people here, and I'll do these presentations, and hopefully people find them interesting. And as I said, they'll be up there so people could watch at their own leisure. And just make sure this is working. And then I got you do a little history of Zionism, and then some anti-Zionism from the ultra-Orthodox perspective, and the Haavara transfer agreement, like I have in the title. And other people look forward to streaming right now, and I guess you'll let him continue doing what he's doing, and I'm going to do more Jewish topical stuff, not like talk show. Although people want to come on later or ask specific questions about Judaism, I'll be checking the chat in between presentations. So let me jump right in. History of Zionism, ethnicity, nationalism, and the origins of Zionism. Some of the stuff is basic, but as I did in my speed reading thing in memory, just these slideshows are very useful. People come on and see the basic information, hear me talk, and see the slideshow. It's kind of like university education style, and it seems like a pretty good way to do it. So if I had more time, I would try to make these myself, but there's relatively good ones out there, so I'm using them. Okay, people know Zionism, mainly the father of modern Zionism. Herzl is basically the father of modern day Israel. Your basic definition: the biblical word Zion is often used as a synonym for Jerusalem and the land of Israel. You got the Encyclopedia Britannica, a Jewish nationalist movement that has had its goal the creation and support of a Jewish state in Palestine, the ancient homeland of the Jews. In the Basel program, Zionism strive to create for the Jewish people a home in Palestine secured by public law. The historical problem: are Jews a nation or a religion? An ethnicity: what's the connection? Do the Jews have the right to the ancient Israel? These fundamental questions that are still a big problem till today. And I'm only going to be covering in this, the Jewish perspective of Zionism, in the Jewish Haredi position of anti-Zionism, and the transfer agreement between Nazi Germany and the early Zionist movement. And there's a lot to the Arab perspective and other perspectives to it also, but those won't be part of my presentation. More time, hopefully there's other resources on that people will be able to find, or we could discuss that more. Just what is a nation? What is nationalism? Some popular definitions. This is interesting related to ethno-nationalism in America, and a lot of these public debates that I've been having and probably will continue to have, and that's why I'm putting these presentations onto my YouTube page in reference to these public debates that I'm having, questions people keep on asking me, they'll be able to get decent information from my YouTube page for people who prefer getting information like this. So, this is just some precursor information. This is probably like some college course, probably, or just a lecture on Zionism. So, the ethnicism, state of mind, conversion of such attributes of ethnicity into highly ranked attributes values, to nationalism aspires to political self-determination for the ethnic group in its own land. Enter Israel. So, Declaration of the State of Israel at the UN 48. Notice the picture of Herzl. The Declaration of Independence from the State of Israel. English translation. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained to statehood, created cultural values and national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books, the Bible. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. Impelled by this historic and traditionalist attachment, Jews strove in every successive generation to reestablish themselves in their ancient homeland. The main argument: the land of Israel is the birthplace of the Jewish people. The spiritual, religious, and national identity was shaped there, even though at the time most of the people who would be going there would be from Europe. We were forcibly exiled from Israel, mainly by Rome. And nevertheless, in exile, we prayed and did not lose faith and hope to return to restore sovereignty. Despite all manner of restriction and persecution and insecurity, Jews continued to maintain some presence in Palestine, and Jews as a group and individuals never ceased to return. Since the destruction of the Jewish Commonwealth by Rome, it became a backward province of successive empires, but never been an indigenous statehood. Until the 20th century, the Jews were the only people who regarded Palestine as their homeland. And so this is, based, all these things I'm presenting here are from the pure Israeli perspective. I will not be presenting the Palestinian perspective tonight, although it's important. And you can see on my YouTube, I am involved and I do take note of that. Obviously the biblical perspective, Abraham, the brief timeline of ancient Israel, the start of the monarchy, King David, the partition of the division of the northern and southern of kingdom of Judah and the 10 tribes. In 722, the Assyrians invade northern kingdom, the end of the kingdom of Israel. Part of the populations deported to the eastern frontier of Assyria. Many people fled south to Judah, who became much more populated. And as I've shown in the population estimates, where there might have been as many as 5 million Jews in ancient Israel before the downfall of this period. In a basic ancient map. The destruction of the Babylonians, the temple destroyed, the main Babylonian exile, and then a short period later, the fall of Babylon, the rise of Persia, Cyrus the Great, and gives the Jews the permission to return to Israel, of which only a few 100,000 return. And that's written in the Bible. That's the end of the biblical canon. Second temple built, and that's the closing of the canonization of the Hebrew Bible. Then Alexander takes over Israel. The partition of the Greek Empire. Judah is part of the Seleucid Empire. Hellenization. Although Greek just controlled it, the Jews are rather Hellenized and just become part of the Greek Empire. And then eventually the Maccabee Rebellion, the Hasmonean Kingdom, the downfall of Greece, the Hasmonean Kingdom, until the Roman Empire comes and takes over Judah, and eventually the revolt of the Jews against Roman control and the destruction of the temple. Possibly over 1 million Jews killed, expelled, put in slaves and spread all over the Mediterranean. The Bar Kokhba revolt a little later than that, and the complete destruction of any Jews in that area. The Romans make it illegal to practice Judaism there. And the last Ask the Rabbi did on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, I pick up some of the history from there with the church. So you get the Byzantine, the Romans completely suppress any Jews from having activities in the state of Israel. Then you have Byzantine control, Eastern Roman Empire, Justinian. Then the Arabs start to control Israel. Muhammad, after the next generation, and take over Jerusalem. They build the Dome of the Rock and the mosque that still stands there till today. It was very important for understanding politics today. Know that temple, that Dome of the Rock, and the mosque there was built a generation after Muhammad. Then you got the Crusades. Obviously, there was Jewish belief the whole time about the return to Israel. We had symbols of Zionism, and symbols of Israel all throughout our exile. The menorah, which supposedly the Romans took back to Rome. It's in the Arch of Titus, shows them looting the treasures of the temple. People till today, the conspiracy whether the Vatican has this stuff or not hidden somewhere. And then you have the start of Zionism, the revival. Although Jews prayed in Hebrew and wrote holy books and studied holy texts in Hebrew, the language was largely unspoken. So the beginning of Zionism in the late 19th century, and mostly Russia, you have the revival of the Hebrew language. The flag symbol made from the talit that people have worn for generations till today. And you have your French emancipation, big event in Europe that will lead to the division of Jews till today. And Jews are basically given full citizenship. So this is the speech on religious minorities and questionable professions to the French National Assembly in 1789. But they say to me, the Jews have their own judges and laws. I respond that it is your fault, and you should not allow it. We must refuse everything to the Jews as a nation and accord everything to Jews as individuals. And we must withdraw recognition from their judges. They should only have our judges. We must refuse legal protection to the maintenance of the so-called laws of their Judaic organization. They should not be allowed to form in the state either a political body or an order. They must be citizens individually. But some will say to me they do not want to be citizens. Well, then, if they do not want to be citizens, they should say so, and then we shall banish them. It is repugnant to have in the state an association of non-citizens and a nation within the nation, and short serves the presumed status of every man resident in the country is to be a citizen. So before that, Jews had largely lived under certain sort of self-rule, under the patronage of European nobility, as I discussed in the video about the Holocaust. And, so the rabbis, we had our separate courts and the rabbinic controls, and there was a patronage to the local European nobility, but largely we didn't really own our own land, and we weren't full citizens and didn't have all the full rights. So with the emancipation, the rise of Napoleon, the French Revolution, we become full citizens. And, here's your three main paths that we have: assimilation, the main thing of the German Jews or converts. And then you have the rise of reform, who tried to make some middle ground, and a Haskalah, the difference between the Eastern and the Western, some form conservative Reform Judaism. And then you have the traditional of ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox, that all these movements largely survive till today, are a direct result of the emancipation that was afforded to us by the French. The ultra-Orthodox attitude that we're going to get more into regarding anti-Zionism: the exile is the punishment of God. It will end by a miracle redemption and by the coming of the Messiah. He will come if people will continue to pray and to observe Jewish laws and tradition. And then the Haskalah: enlighten, learn, scholarly, advocated adopting Enlightenment principles, pressing for a better integration into European society, increasing education in secular studies and Jewish studies in a modern way. Both of these movements survive till today. and largely represent what's happening with American Jews. Okay, so that's the first one. Okay, Bob, you're the main reason I'm doing this. It appears that it's working. I'm not sure if you hear me, Bob, but it appears that it's working. Negation, glad to see you. So I'm not sure if you're in a hurry to leave, Bob. I'm going to do a few more slides, and I'm going to get into the Haavara agreement and but I want to cover the history of the Zionist movement. And I said you're the main precipitants to me doing this. It was your questions, Bob. 1 second, got a text. 1 second. Okay, so let's get on with this. So let's look at one quick one, creation of Israel. Looking at kind of the back cursor, what was going on in Israel, and this will lead into the Haavara agreement and your questions, Bob, and you might know more about it than me, and I'm happy to even let you on the show and talk about it if you could get your technology working. Okay. The rise of the Ottoman Empire, 1500. They conquer huge part of the Mediterranean, controlling Israel till 1918. This isn't a very good slideshow, but just a backdrop of look at a few of the maps. Then after the World War I, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the British control Israel, Egypt, Sudan, Jordan, Palestine. The French have parts of Syria, Lebanon, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. The Italians have Libya. And the rest of the Middle East and other regions, leading up to the British control of Mandate Palestine, the negotiation between European Jews to have that piece of land given to us, the first potential British mandate, the map of what it might have included. I won't get too much into politics here. There's a lot to do to this. Then the eventual creation of the state of Israel, Zionism, the Holocaust, partition till today, Arab-Israeli war, till you have modern Israel today, and the diminishment of the Palestinian people. This is a well-known history. I'm just covering this very quickly. That I do want to get to your questions, Bob. So how has the Kabbalah influenced Zionism? Very interesting. The Kabbalah, there's a dispute between the Ramban and the Ramban, Maimonides and Nachmanides, and in terms of anti-Zionism, we might get to that later, about what the purpose of the Jewish religion is. So the Maimonides held that it was kind of dispensational, and that after the Romans destroyed the temple and exiled us from the land, it was a change in dispensation, and that the form of Judaism changed, as opposed to Ramban and other scholars held that basically the Judaism that's practiced today outside of Israel is purely a reminder to remind us that we've been exiled to Israel, from Israel, and should return. And, so the Kabbalah always held a connection to the land of Israel, like the Templars and the early Crusades and Shabbatai Tzvi. So it's really a matter of a different issue. And I hope to start streaming a more Kabbalah and esoteric subject. So I want to, cover the more basic stuff first. And, so let me do, this kind of Israeli propaganda thing of the creation of Israel and Zionism. So you got Herzl, the Balfour Declaration, the Herzl's famous book at the the Jewish state. Oppression and persecution cannot exterminate us. No nation on earth has survived such struggles and suffering as we have gone through. Palestine is our ever memorial historic home. The very name of Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvelous potency. The world will be freed by our liberty, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness, and whatever we attempt there to accomplish for our own welfare will react powerfully and beneficially for the good of humanity. The idea which I developed in this pamphlet is a very old one. It is the restoration of the Jewish state. As I had said on a different stream, Zionism started the day that the Romans exiled us, that Jews had desired to return, the famous Balfour Declaration, that it was the 100-year anniversary last year, or still I guess this year is within the 100th year anniversary of it. Modern scholars had said that President Trump moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem is historically in line as significant as the Balfour Declaration. So, the British Secretary to the Colonies, when it is asked what is meant by the development of a Jewish nation home in Palestine, it may be answered that it's not the imposition of a Jewish nationality upon the inhabitants of Palestine as a whole, but the further development of the existing Jewish community with the assistance of Jews in other parts of the world, in order that it may become a center in which the Jewish people as a whole may take on grounds of religion and race and interest and pride. So, the mandate, 1920, League of Nations, 51 member countries, the entire League of Nations unanimously declared recognition has been given to the historical connection between the Jewish people of Palestine and to the grounds of reconstituting their national home in that country. Some, just legalistic matters, and this information is well known. And, so the mandate, the area under Article 25 ends up becoming Jordan. And generally that at that period, Palestine's a geographic area controlled by Britain, not a nationality, and Britain will control the immigration, how many Jews are allowed to come there, which largely won't be a problem until after the Holocaust. That this will be related to the Haavara agreement and the agreement with Nazi Germany that we'll be getting to soon. So Jews have some sort of self-determination as a British colony. At that point, Israel, Palestine was basically like India or any other British colony. Although it was recognized that Jews have a right to that land, that's the historical homeland of the Jewish people, and the Jews in diaspora were going to be allowed to go there by some level. United States Congress, the joint resolution of the House of Congress of the United States unanimously endorsed the mandate to Palestine, confirming the irrevocable right of Jews to settle in the area of Palestine anywhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Although, until the Holocaust, there's not going to be huge amounts of Jews wanting to go there. President Wilson and Harding. League of Nations dissolves in 1946. UN Charter, 1945, created implicitly recognized the mandate for Palestine. Strong lobbying in the U.S. Rabbi Weiss, Peter Bergson. There's really a lot of history. People want to know more about this. There's a lot of good material on this. Okay, so with the mandate of Palestine, you got the issue of holy places, assuring respect for the existing interest of the three religions and providing the necessary guarantees of freedom of access, worship, and religious administration, and the city of Jerusalem establishing effective administration of the city which can protect the rights of the various elements of its permanent population, Christian, Arab, and Jewish. Hence, I said President Trump's moving of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, possibly in line as one of the biggest events in the history of Israel. UN Charter, Resolution 181, the recommendation of the partition of Israel in 47, accepted by the General Assembly. This is largely pro-Israel. You got, Dr. Arbahil Silver. And then the War of Independence, eventually the overthrow of Britain and the creation of Israel and the armies. Then you have the 67 army, the 67 attack, where Israel ends up gaining Jerusalem. And that's it. Just a brief overview of Zionism. I'm going to do one more. I hope you're still there, Bob. So I got one more that I'm going to go into the Haavara agreement. Okay, so just a few minutes, Bob, and then we're going to get to what you're interested in. I just wanted to have an overview of Zionism here just a little bit. And, this will be like Jewish identity because it's going to relate to Orthodox Jewish anti-Zionism. Obviously the Notori Karta that met with the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, and the Holocaust conference in Iran that David Duke was at. And, so overview of the division of Israeli society, and so you have the more religious and secular division, ultra-Orthodox, where you have Lithuanian, Hasidic, Sephardic, and these are kind of the political parties are divided along these lines. Hasidic groups, there's over 30 large Hasidic groups that have thousands of members. You have the mainstream, which are like Belz, Gore, a lot of them, like Bobov, and the ones that function within Israel might have anti-Zionistic leanings, but largely function within Israel, don't do military service. Then you have the ones that like do outreach and try to make all Jews, join their movement, like Chabad and Breslov. And then you have what here they're calling the radical ones, which would be actively anti-Israel, like Notori Karta and Satmar, and others, and within others have that leaning. Breakdown of demographics. Most biggest portion of Israel secular. They're saying about 5% of the secular are actively anti-religious, called Masorti, like middle of the road traditional. Most of those aren't really religious, but are still traditional. And the religious, and you have Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. Some of these survey questions I went through with Babs from the Pew survey. And, so you have the religious Jews and their perspective on Israel. So, after the Holocaust, you have ultra-Orthodox survivors largely end up in America, Belgium, London, and Israel. Most going to Israel. Before then, you had some in Israel, and you'll see that basically the ultra-Orthodox always opposed Israel. But after the Holocaust and what happens in Europe related to the Haavara agreement, we'll see after the war, basically most end up in Israel. At the beginning, you have the Orthodox group with Ben Gurion, the Aguda, and the Haredim are part of the original governments. Then you start having conflicts, women soldiers, the forced secularization of Yemenites, and later, like the Who is a Jew, Brother Daniel, where they ruled that a Jew who converts to Christianity isn't Jewish, and the Orthodox rule is that, of course, they're still Jewish, even if they do convert to Christianity. Not here. You mentioned the Langer case against Mamzeros and marriage law. Religious parties get into the government and arguments over Sabbath. Should the government, municipalities shut down over Sabbath? Gradually become more powerful. The 500,000 Haredi demonstration in 1999. I was actually there. I was in Israel. I remember that demonstration. Almost all of Jerusalem shut down for that. The Tell law to regulate the exemption of Orthodox Jews into the IDF. You have looks at Israel. You have extreme rejection of Zionism, the demonization of Israel according to the religion, the rejection of the secular character of the state, compartmental in expansion. So you have different factors of the Orthodox, and I'll split into camps. So you see, you have the radical ultra-Orthodox and the radical religious Zionist, where they're both, he's saying deterministic messianism, essentialism, perfectionism. On one side, this really leads both to reject the state of Israel's laws and pragmatic politics. So the ultra-Orthodox have a commitment to Jewish peoplehood and attempting to direct Israel a more religious path, pragmatic political involvement. They differ on Zionism, modernity, secularism, army service, civil religion, common narrative. So there's about 600,000 in Israel today, about 10% of the population. You say orthopraxis, extreme observance of religious law, traditional, very radical religious. The enclaves community, learners study Talmud and law. Comprehensive religious covers every aspect of the life. Hierarchical, Jewish law, and there's rabbis, sages of the generation. And so you have the pocket that are pro-Zionist, and then the anti-Zionist. Here, it's a question how to divide this up. In the poor, most don't work, gender segregation, extremely high birth rate, anti-modernity values. The huge protest. If anyone sees me on Facebook, I'm always posting this stuff. Radicalism, that Zionism is the enemy. All the great leaders of Israel have warned us that the impurity of Zionism is the root and source of all the troubles that are in the world spiritually and concretely. Even the rabbis will say, God forbid the Nazis the Germans didn't commit the Holocaust. It was the fault of the Zionism. And till today, Arabs aren't the problem, Muslims aren't the problem, Zionists are the problem. And it's a theological stance that will get more, say the separation of sexes, and that's a big issue in politics in Jerusalem. Huge unemployment rates with the cow law and certain Israeli politics. We get it more into Israeli politics in a different stream. Being part of political activity, say Haredim, ultra-Orthodox Jews, have always been part of Netanyahu's coalition. We're basically a ruling party. We have power in the state of Israel. We run government commissions. We're part of the ruling coalition for most of the last 20 years. Possible racism from the Zionist schools, anti-Arabism, anti-technology, some joining the IDF, although you will have whole units in the Israeli Defense Force of ultra-Orthodox Jews. Increased wealth and materialism, consumerism, even among ultra-Orthodox Jews, that some entering the workforce, more women of religious Jews working than men, and fight against Western values, but Western values seeping in. So I just want to do an overview of that. And so now I'm going to do what Bob was asking about, the Haavara agreement. Let me just check the sound. Okay. So just read this. And so I'm not going to, I'll answer a little bit about conspiracy theories if you want. Now, all these PowerPoints I took from other places. If I had time, I would like to make my own PowerPoints, but I don't really have time. Yeah, you saw the tefillin there. I'm just checking the chat. Yeah, I mean, Islam, the third most holy place is, Jerusalem. Okay, so here is what Bob was talking about, the Haavara transfer agreement. And, let me just show this. Maybe, people have seen this. The Haavara agreement, transfer agreement signed in August 25th, 1933, after 3 months of talks by the Zionist Federation of Germany, the Anglo-Palestine Bank, under the directive of the Jewish Agency and the economic authorities of the Nazi Germany. The agreement was designed to help facilitate the immigration of German Jews to Palestine. While it helped Jews immigrate, it forced them to temporarily give up possessions to Germany before departing. Those possessions could later be reobtained by transferring them to Palestine as German export goods. And Nazi Germany even made a commemorative coin of this agreement. So you see the Nazi symbol together with the with the Jewish star, and in relation to the boycott. So people are familiar with this history. So, here's a quick PowerPoint slide on the Haavara Agreement. And, basically, at that point, the Nazis had raised the power. There had been an international Jewish movement with the Poles and other groups that had joined to try to form a boycott of German goods. And so the Zionist Jews who wanted to create their own state against the British, because the British were controlling Palestine at the time, and extremist Jews wanted to overthrow the British rule. So they teamed up with Nazi Germany in order to get power of Israel, and they actually made a money agreement. So actually, money that had been confiscated by Germany from the Jews, I think 25% of that went to the early Zionist movement. So, God forbid, if you meet a Holocaust survivor, they talk about the confiscation of their property and bank accounts. A certain amount, I think 25% of that money went to the early Zionist, and that's basically, that blood money, so to say, is what set up the early Israeli government that formed the IDF and the early like Irgun and forces that were able to defeat the British colonial control of Israel. So, like a little overview of what was going on, transfer of money, transfer of goods, that Nazi Germany was giving Israel goods that they needed to set up in Israel, and they in turn were giving money, and through the agreement that later that would be the confiscated money of German Jews. So the Trust and Transfer Office of Haavara places at the disposal of the banks in Palestine amounts in Reichmarks, which have been put at the disposal by the Jewish immigrants from Germany. The banks avail themselves of these amounts in Reichmarks in order to make payments on behalf of Palestinian merchants for goods imported by them from Germany. The merchants pay in the value of the goods to the banks, and the Haavara pays to the counter value to the Jewish immigrants from Germany. To the same extent, the local merchants will make use of this arrangement to the import of German goods will serve to withdraw Jewish capital from Germany. So basically, the Nazis wanted the Jews out of Germany, and so they were willing to facilitate the travel by helping the Jews to leave. And, to some extent, it's possible that the concentration camps, the original plan had been to deport the Jews to Israel. But obviously, Britain controlled Israel at the time, which is problematic. And we saw the history of Zionism, because Germany was not able to get the Jews to Israel because the British stopped the Jews from going there. The agreement was viewed as a convenient solution to the Jewish problem in Europe. It was seen as preferable to have the Jewish population concentrated in one single state as opposed to spread out over the world, where they could influence public opinion against Germany. Hitler stated in Mein Kampf that he viewed the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine equal to the establishment of a school of thievery for the international Jewry. In Mein Kampf, Zionism and the creation of Israel is mentioned. So if you look at how many people from Germany went there, you see a lot of money was transferred. Reichmarks, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars today. You have to see how much those Reichmarks were worth today. Percentage of German Jews that went to Israel in 1939, 50% of the Jews that went to Israel were from Germany. So not too many Jews in Germany really wanted to go to Israel because, relatively Germany was the most advanced civilization on earth, the wealthiest, the most powerful, and it wasn't too interesting to go to, at that point would have been, very harsh conditions and not economically developed. And, most German Jews preferred to come to America or England or other places in Europe. So, relatively to the 600,000 Jews that had been in Germany at that time, only about 20,000 go to Israel, but there is a lot of money transferred. And that money is integral in the forming of the armies that fight off and defeat the British. Okay, and that facilitates illegal immigration after the British set up their quota cap in 1938. So the British stopped allowing Jews there, but they used that money to help bring Jews from Russia and different places in there. And to some extent, you see the ideological compatibility with Nazi policy in German Jews, and saying the rise of nationalism, German for the Germany, Pohl for the Poles, Israel for the Jews, ethno-nationalism at all levels, Arab reactions. Obviously, the Britain are concerned with their what's going on with their Arab partners, and they don't want Jews coming and upsetting things, and they make huge efforts to prevent Jews from reaching to Israel, even though the Germans and Nazi Party are actively supporting and financing Jews trying to get to Israel. And eventually, the outbreak of World War II, the end of the Haavara Agreement, and God forbid, the Holocaust. And the connection, to how Arabs look at it today. Anti-Zionist Arabs often cite the Haavara as an example of Nazi-Zionist collaboration. Zionism is used as an agent of European imperialism. Agreement used to undermine the legitimacy of the State of Israel in connection to Holocaust denial. Accusation that during the war, Zionists were more concerned with the Jewish settlement of Palestine than the saving of European Jewry. That will come into anti-Zionism, religious Jewish anti-Zionism. So, are you still here, Bob? Does that satisfy you? There's a lot more to it. I have books on the subject, and just read the chat. I'm not sure about the role of the Jesuits in it. I have to research that. Anyone want to come on and talk? I'll give the link. Otherwise, I'm going to get into religious Jewish anti-Zionism. You're going to have to type your comments or question it. Let me see if because partially this video was in response to this guy, Bob's comment, and I assume you found me from the JF. I'm not sure how you found me, but so you gave this long comment about Hitler being a puppet, controlled opposition. You'd have to put more research into it. To say that, Hitler did negotiate with the Zionist. Eichmann negotiated with the Zionist all the way through the war. I'm saying with the Katzner, through basically the end of the war, that Eichmann had been in negotiation with the Zionists. There's a lot of evidence in the anti-Zionist actually have a lot on this. Saying a lot of Hasidic Hungarian Holocaust survivors blame Zionism and Israel for the Holocaust. You can look up like the Katzner affair. The Holocaust is pretty well documented. Saying, it's actually German documentation. So if you want to talk, like, I don't know your opinion, like the Holocaust, but the numbers for the Holocaust largely come from Nazi German documentation. So you look at the Eichmann trial and all this stuff, but they documented that stuff very deeply. There doesn't seem much of a doubt on that matter. You're saying there's Jewish records. You can look at Yad Vashem, but the records are in German. I don't know where you're coming from if you're in Europe, but saying Germany has the Holocaust denial laws. Germany has the most documentation of it, not the Jews. And I encourage you to look more into it if that's what you're. I don't know Elmer Berger. Never heard of him, Jonathan. So let me show you some of this. Jewish anti-Zionism. People probably heard of Notori Karta. They're the ones who went to the Iran a Holocaust session with David Duke, and you see them protesting Israel in front of the White House and AIPAC. They're always protesting, and they have the historical religious opposition to Zionism. So here's the 1931, the Agudas Yisrael of Israel that later joined the Israeli government, writes to the Muslim Congress of Jerusalem, Orthodox Jewry in Palestine under the auspices of worldwide Orthodox organization Agudas Yisrael is honored to greet the Muslim Congress in the holy city of Jerusalem. May it be God's will that this gathering of Muslim leaders brings blessing in the city and the land chosen by God, and to help bring about peace among all its inhabitants. So we completely deny any suspicion that we want to demand rights to your holy site that's called the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Western Wall. So you could read through these, but generally there was a lot of opposition to the murder of by Zionist of the Dr. Yaakov Yisrael Den. The statement to the UN committee by Rabbi Dushinsky, who's still, from the chief rabbis, his descendants of Israel today. And, as you see, there's a historical precedence for opposition to the state of Israel from religious ground. And I'll get more into that. So from a religious perspective, why would Jews be opposed to the state of Israel? Why would, Bible believers? So Elmer Berger was a Jewish Reform rabbi, widely known for his anti-Zionism, was the executive director of the American Council for Judaism from its founding in 1942 to 55. In general, everybody opposed, almost all Jews opposed Zionism until after the Holocaust and after the defeat of the British. So, I mean, the extremist Zionists who formed the Israeli armed forces that were capable of, bombing the King David Hotel and kicking out the British from Israel, were not very popular. However, once they got Britain out and got the state, they became more and more popular. And then after the Holocaust, and when masses, hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews come to Israel, most of the Jews decide it's better to team up with the extremist Jews who had teamed up with the Nazi Germany and who had used violence to throw out the British and make our own state. So, the reform largely don't become pro-Israel till after 1967, even, where a lot of Jews worldwide thought that Israel wouldn't last long, and it wasn't until 67 where the Jews had such a good performance in the war against Egypt and the opposing forces that Jews largely started supporting Israel. But the religious opposition to Zionism was the strongest because it was based on the Bible. Yeah, I mean, you have to look into it and actually. So let's look at some more of this. So you got the biblical verses about the exile. So here's a collection of. Here's a popular site of protest where you have Torah, true Jews, Judaism versus Israel. I mean, Israel versus Judaism. And, so you have the prophecy of the exile in the Bible, a lot of verses. And then you have these prophecies that the exiled will be gathered only when the Messiah comes. Like the verses in Isaiah, royal scepter will emerge from the stock of Yishai, and a sapling will sprout from its roots. The Spirit of God will rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and the power, the Spirit of knowledge, the fear of God. And it shall come to pass on that day that the Lord will once again acquire the rest of his people, and he will gather the dispersed of Israel and the scattered of Judah. He will gather from the four corners of the earth. And Ezekiel to the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from all sides, and I will bring them to their land, and my servant David will be king over them. And there's a lot of Christian Zionism verses in the New Testament. And then the Talmud says, it brings a verse from the Songs of Songs. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and the deer of the field, not to arouse or awaken the love before it is desired. And according to the Talmud, there's three oaths. The Talmud interprets this metaphorical language to mean as follows. The speaker here is God, and the daughters of Jerusalem are the people and the nations of the world. During the Jewish exile, which began with the destruction of the temple in the year 69 by the Romans, God placed three oaths upon the world, two upon the Jewish people and one upon the nations. The Jewish people were forsworn not to immigrate as a wall en masse to the Holy Land and not to rebel against the other nations. The nations were forsworn not to afflict the Jews too much. So according to the Talmudic wisdom, that as long as the Jews don't break these oaths and don't immigrate in mass to Israel or rebel against other nations, the other nations won't persecute the Jews. And that's why, according to the ultra-Orthodox Jews, the cause of our persecution is usually our own downfall. And today that Zionism is the ultimate cause of the problems with the Jews. I mean, with the nations and anti-Semitism. Yeah, I mean, you were talking post-liberal age, and Irgun wasn't mainstream Zionism till the 70s, and that's Netanyahu and like Jabotinsky. And there's a lot more to this, and hopefully there'll be more to it. Gabriel, cultural critique. I think it's largely correct, although I disagree with the evolution. And yeah, so the revisionist Zionism, Bob, I agree with you. Like, I'm largely anti-Zionist, and I'm more critical of these views, and that's why I'm going through the Jewish religious anti-Zionism. So further, the reason for the oath against mass immigration is that if the Jews were to do this on their own, why would the Messiah have to come together in the exiles of Israel? The redemption of the Jewish people is compared to a grain harvest, the grape harvest, the spice harvest, and a woman giving birth. The common thread of all these metaphors is that they cannot be done too early. If grain is cut too early, it will not be good even as animal feed. If grapes are cut too early, they will not even be good to make vinegar. If spices picked too early, it will not have a smell, and it must be allowed to dry out on the tree. If a woman gives birth prematurely, the baby will not live. So too the Jewish people hurries to the end. They will not be successful, but at the proper time, may it be soon, they will be successful. Another Talmud, the difference between the present age and the days of Messiah is that in the present era, Jews are in exile unto the nations, and in the days of Messiah, they will be independent. So yeah, people could read more from this. A collection of the sages on the matter about their opinion about coming to Israel, and even the German famous Rabbi Samson Full Hirsch, when the uprising led by Bar Kokhba proved a disastrous error, it became essential that the Jewish people be reminded for all times of an empirical fact, namely that they must never again attempt to restore their national independence by their own power. They were to entrust their future as a nation solely to divine providence. And here's a nice collection of sayings of famous rabbis about anti-Zionism. So, the Rabbi Soloveitchik, it was, the here's the famous Satmar Rebbe, people in New York, the famous Williamsburg. So even when there's the possibility of heresy, one must be killed rather than transgress, and all the more so in this case, since we have already explained that taking redemption and political power before the time constitutes denial of the divine providence, even regarding the tribe of Ephraim, who merely erred, thinking that the time of redemption had already arrived. It is written, they did not believe in God. The Rambam, at the end of the the section in the books of Moses writes that a man has no share in the Torah of Moses unless he believes that all the occurrences are miraculous, not following the rules of nature. The reason we must take physical action in most areas is because that is what the Creator decreed. But in the area of redemption, where the Holy Torah forbade us to take even the slightest step towards forcing the end, one who does so is acting against Amunah and has no share in the Torah of Moses. If we were put all the sins of this generation and all the transgressions committed in the entire world on one side of a scale and Zionist state on the other side, it would outweigh everything, for it is the poisonous source of the worst defilement, the worst cause of damage in the entire world, and they are the ones who defile the entire world. Here's the Ben Ish Chai, who was the chief rabbi of Baghdad. We do not mention the miracles of the Exodus from Egypt every day. Why do we mention the miracles, the Exodus of Egypt every day, but not the miracles of Purim? It was a very great miracle in which the entire Jewish people were saved from death. The answer is that regarding the future redemption, Scripture states, I have adjured you not to arouse or awaken the love before it is desired. We were forbidden under oath to force the hour to make any effort towards the redemption and the coming of Mashiach. This is why our sages say that Mashiach will come only when we take our minds off him. This is the meaning of the verse, I will show wonders like the days when you went out of Egypt. The future generations will be similar to the Exodus, which happened when we took our minds off it. Israel did not force this hour in order to make any efforts towards the Exodus. They continued their labor and affliction until God sent Moses, his chosen, to take them out. This is why we remember the Exodus every day, to teach that the future redemption will be similar to the Exodus. Israel will not force the hour or take any physical action towards the redemption, but rather everything will be done on its own, an act of heaven. In the miracle of Purim, on the other hand, Mordecai forced the hour by sending Esther to the king in violation of the law, thus endangering her life. Although there were still many months left before the fulfillment of Haman's decree, perhaps Jews would learn from this story that now as well we must force the hour and take action to bring. We must not force the hour and take action to bring Mashiach by force. Therefore, we do not mention the miracle of Purim daily. You have the Chafetz Chaim, the famous teacher of the laws of hate speech that we talked about. The Torah teaches us not to resist the nations, even when they fight against us. We must follow in the footsteps of Jacob, our father, and his encounter with his brother Esau, as the Rambam writes in the Bible, on commentary in the Bible. All that happened between Jacob and Esau happened to us constantly with Esau's children. We must adopt the methods of that righteous person to make the three preparations that he made: prayer, a gift, and escape through war, that is to flee to safety. As long as he walked on the well-treaded path, the Holy One, blessed be he, saved us from their hands. But since we have strayed from the path and new leaders have arisen who choose new methods, leaving behind our ancestors' weapons and adopting the methods of our enemies, we have fared worse and worse, and the great travails have befallen us. And let's read Rabbi Shalom Ber Schneerson of Lubavitch, the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe. Even if these men were loyal to Hashem and his Torah, and even if they were a chance that they would achieve their goal, we may not listen to them in this matter to make our redemption with our own power. It is not forbidden even to force the end with excessive prayer, all the more so with the power of worldly methods. This is to leave exile by force. We are not permitted, and this is against our true hope that Hashem will bring us Mashiach Tzidkenu soon, and our redemption will come through Hashem himself. The Munkacher Rebbe, Hasidic group in Brooklyn, was extremely against him. After the sins of the spies, Moses told the Jewish people, do not go up and do not fight, but they went up anyhow, and the ark and the bris of Hashem and Moses did not move from the camp. This is a prophecy about our time. The Zionists go up to Israel with a strong hand to found colonies and fight with the Gentiles. This is against the command of our holy God, who warned us against this way, who said it would be bitter in the end. But the Ark of Moses, the Torah, the true leaders and loyal Jews did not move from the camp to join the Zionists, and they beat them and destroyed them until Qumrah refers to the destructions and the killings we have seen in Jerusalem near the Kosel of Marvi in 1929. And finally, your Reb Benzi and Halberstam of Bubov, the school I learned in For behold, in our times there have arisen irresponsible men who throw the yoke of Torah and mitzvah and convince the Jewish people to be like all the nations, to build themselves an independent government, and they pretend that this is the ultimate redemption, but it is obvious and known that they speak falsely and that their way is in complete antithesis of the Torah. See the translation of Song of Songs 8:4. The King Mashiach will say, I adjure you, my people, house of Israel, why do you fight with the people of the land to leave the exile with a little more and master of the world? We recall the love of the righteous ones, and it will be his will to redeem you. And it is based on the Gemara and Kesubos that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the Jewish people swear not to force the end. And your Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson of Lubavitch, the father-in-law of the last Lubavitch Rebbe, who many Jews believe was the Messiah. I'm against the proposed Jewish state. It would be a calamity for the Jews, and in a short time they will realize what a calamity it is. I do not know the nature and goal of the organization which I've been asked to join. If its goal is to strengthen Torah and mitzvahs, we already have our ways and methods, the smooth path we have inherited from our holy teachers, in which we lived, in which we will give over our children. And if its goal is the building of Eretz Yisrael, as its name indicates, we were once a great nation and kingdom by the grace of the Most High God, but because of his anger at our sins, after thousands of prophetic warnings, we were driven out of the Holy Land. Hashem, our God, put us in exile and promised us that at a time known only to him, he would redeem us. And it is clear that we will not return to the land by the power of our hands. God, who placed us in exile, it is he who redeems his holy people, and with his holy arm he will save us, and he will bring us back to him in our holy land. Now the organization to fund to build the land or any similar organization. So some powerful stuff there. Check the chat. Okay, so here's this page has a lot of collections from famous rabbis going back generations about this concept of forcing the hand of Israel, and God forbid, by religiously many ultra-Orthodox Jews hold that, God forbid, the cause of the Holocaust was in fact Zionism. So and I encourage people to read through this if they're interested. It has the most famous rabbis collection of rabbis from many generations and their collected thoughts on it. And link to that is books on ultra-Orthodox Jews and the rabbi. If people are more interested in reading the opinion on that, I encourage them to do so. And, to some extent, the biggest opponents of the state of Israel are, in fact, ultra-Orthodox Jews. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll put the link. I'm going to put the link in the chat in case anyone wants to come on and discuss this. And I wanted to get this information out there. And, it's important in this nature of nationalism because, like Richard Spencer said, he's kind of like a white Zionist. And, as I said, I'm against ethno-nationalism. I'm a multiculturalist, even in Israel. And, some of the strongest opponents of Zionism are, in fact, religious Jews. So if anyone has any questions in the chat or wants to come on and join the discussion, I'm open. Otherwise, I'm going to call it a night. So, Bob, to me, it's pretty clear that the Holocaust was true. I say, check your German records. I'm saying, according to the German records, there were 5.5 million Jews killed. That's not according to the Jews. That's according to the Germans and the official documentation. So, that's what I'm saying. When Germany has Holocaust denial law, that's not based on Jewish conspiracy. That's based on their own historical record. And you could look into it. To me, the Holocaust, pretty factual. It happened. Whether the number of people, how many people, it's hard to know. You could look into the details. I'm not an expert on that subject. I know many, many Holocaust survivors. I was in the bathhouses in Jerusalem, and even as a kid here in Metro Detroit, and remember seeing people with numbers on their arms. I'm pretty sure the Holocaust happened. I don't know about the gassing. I'm not an expert in it, but I'm pretty sure that it also happened that way. I don't know the number. If that's your area of expertise or wisdom, according to the German government today, that did happen. I don't think the Jews have that much power. I'm saying we do have power in banking, money, influence, but control, I don't think so. I encourage people to do their research. Is that you, Jonathan?
Yeah. I actually do teach Holocaust when I was in Ghana. But there's two types of documentation. There's the census numbers, which is where they get the totals, and then there's the individual figures.
You're talking
And the
about
figures.
the German.
Yeah,
You're talking about official German government, the Nazis' official records or whatever.
Well, yeah, that's the piece by piece. There's the Einsatzgruppen reports are the death squads, and those are the best ones. But even those are incomplete. But they add up to about 1 million, and that's the shootings, mainly in Ukraine and the Baltic states and Belarus before the death camps are opened. And then there's numbers on people sent to the death camps, but the recordings are not complete. For instance, Auschwitz, they didn't record people who were sent to execution immediately. They only recorded people sent to labor because it was. So we have a number of people sent, and then we have a number of people subtracted from it. So that's why you get the difference between, say, that 5.1 million or that 5.8 million, because you've got one set you add up, and you get about 1 million shot and maybe 3 million in the death camps, and then you have to figure out labor camps and ghettos. And then the other figures are the differences in the census figures accounting for population growth. So you'll see all the figures hover around between 5 and 6 million, but there's differences between that because the numbers themselves are not complete.
Yeah, but I mean, the evidence is pretty conclusive that there were millions of Jews killed.
Yes, right, but it's the evidence.
I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of personal testimony. I mean, even videos and documents. There's probably videos and pictures of tens of thousands of people being killed, and unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence in that. I mean, I know people looking back at it, God forbid, like people, it's hard to know what happened in history, and it's hard to know what to believe. People have lost faith in the institutions, and I'm not really one pushing Holocaust history, but to me, like, I'm pretty clear that happened, God forbid.
No, I would agree.
But, who's at fault? I don't know if you have any insight on the Haavara transfer agreement or the intention, kind of like the play between Germany and Britain, and maybe the early Zionists had been working together with the Nazis, trying to get the Jews to go to Israel, but the British don't let them, and that it's possible that the intention, certainly the Germans wanted to deport and get rid of the Jews. Did they originally want to kill them? Did they originally think in some sort of co-conspirator way that they were going to be able to make it to Israel?
I'm not sure if they cared whether they were sent to British Palestine at the time or not. They think they definitely wanted them out. So, I mean, things like Kristallnacht are definitely pressure to try and get Jewish emigration out of Germany. And then there's ideas floated around before the invasion of Poland. They send them all to Madagascar, but obviously British Navy is not going to allow that. And then there's this idea to push them on land across the Urals into Siberia. But one thing that happens, why you have a difference in how it's carried out with the Holocaust and something like the Armenian genocide, and you see this in Rwanda too, is that geographically, by the time the Nazis invade the Soviet Union in June 22nd, 1941, there's no way they can physically move Jews out of Europe other than killing them.
I mean, and God forbid, the killing of prisoners of war was basically standard practice across Europe, till like the Geneva Convention and the UN, basically everyone practiced killing the prisoners of war, unfortunately.
Yeah, but some powers are worse. I mean, there's differences for death rates and prisoners of war, even among the Axis powers. For instance, the Soviet Union, something like 50% of their POWs in German captivity die mostly through starvation. And for the U.S., it's like 12%. But then the U.S., we have a huge number, something like 25% dying in Japanese captivity. So there are differences there.
Yeah, I mean, God forbid, like, I mean, I don't, I mean, there could be like, Norman Finkelstein in the Holocaust industry, and God forbid there's a lot of improper use of the Holocaust. And even most, I lived in Borough Park that has the highest percentage of Holocaust survivors in the world. And people did not like Elie Wiesel, generally all the stuff that went on. And even in terms of reparations, a lot of people refused to take reparation money. They thought that was a bad idea. And a lot of anti-Zionists till today, especially Hungarian Holocaust survivors, have deep resentment to Israel. You know anything about Rudolf Katzner?
Yeah, I do know a little bit about that. That had to do with the last deportations out of Budapest that Eichmann arranged to Auschwitz.
Yeah, and I guess Kurt Becker, I think was his name, the one that he met with, and he actually testified to get him relieved of war crimes, and presumably they could have prevented the death of 400,000 Hungarian Jews that they didn't. They had the information, and it's a lot of bad blood till today when you see like ultra-Orthodox Jews protesting Israel. The majority of the largest anti-Israel Jews are Hungarian.
I did not know that. I know that Notori Karta was a large number, but I didn't know that they were Hungarian.
Well, Notori Karta is the most extreme because they'll actually team up with, so to say, the enemies of Israel, as opposed to just being anti-Zionist. But I mean, the bad blood between Israel and the Hungarians, who believe that the Zionists purposely, God forbid, you let 400,000 Hungarian Jews die for no reason due to trying to do benefit Zionism. And Katzner actually was executed, and his granddaughter's in the Israeli Knesset. So there's a big internal dispute in Israel till today.
No, yeah, but when you get into these numbers things, you always will have, no matter how good the documentation, some sort of leeway. So you see we take all the numbers, they're all going to be in the 5 million range, but there'll be differences, and that's because the numbers are incomplete. The best documentation is actually the shootings, the Einsatzgruppen, and they have very specific numbers.
There's a lot of pictures of those. I'm saying, God forbid, there's pictures of most of those.
Well, there's pictures of Babi Yar, which was one of the largest, with 33,000 were shot in Ukraine in 2 days.
Yeah, man, and unfortunately, people should learn history. People could learn from history. Obviously, history could be interpreted in many different ways. Like what, and especially like implication. And I said in my debate with JF, a lot of, Jews, but not just Jews, a lot of people, maybe even like Richard Spencer were kind of like, you want to be on the right side of history. And, people might differ as to what the right side of history is. And, if you look at World War II, you had the Zionists and the different parties that were desiring to be on the right side of history. And, relatively, it could be dangerous to be a Jew. It's dangerous to be a minority in a foreign land. It's dangerous to be very different. There's a lot of dangers to different things that, people.
Well, my big theory is the Holocaust wiped out the Zionist opposition. The Bundists were quite strong before the war, and they were all dead after the war.
Yeah, but originally the socialist, like Israel's largely established as a socialist government. Until today, you might consider Israel a socialist country, and it wasn't until
Yeah, but the labor Zionists are very different than the Bundists.
Yeah,
the Bundists wanted, to keep to stay within Europe, be socialist Jewish institutions within Europe, and there are very few Bundists that survived the war.
Until World War II, you would assume that almost no one was a Zionist. Like 5-10% of Jews worldwide were Zionists before World War II, and even after the creation of Israel, most Jews worldwide weren't huge supporters of Zionism till after Israel performed so good in the '67 war.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the numbers, but certainly the number of Bundists drops dramatically after the war because they're all dead, and the number of Zionists increases, particularly after the victory in 48. But yeah, again after 67.
Yeah, I mean, most people were expecting Israel to lose in 67. Most American Jews were predicting that Israel would lose in 67. And, so they wanted to, so to say, be on the right side of history. They were scared. They didn't want to side with a losing side. So they were largely anti-Zionist. But then after 67, Israel took over Jerusalem and pretty resoundingly defeated the neighboring Arab armies. Israel became pretty popular among Jews worldwide. And, started respecting strength that, with the strength of Israel over the last few decades, Israel has become pretty popular worldwide.
Well, I'm not sure if they. I mean, the war was very short. It was only 6 days, and it came out of a preemptive attack against Egypt after they blockaded the Straits of Tiran. But the Israelis had already been able to project power in '56 in the Suez War, so it weren't as weak by then as they had been in 1947, which was pretty much a flat-out victory for them as well.
Yeah. I mean, those periods in the 50s and so after in the 76 are leading up. So, you have any more comments on this? I might end the stream.
No, I think you should end it, but you should look into Elmer Berger, because in the U.S. context, he was probably the single most vocal anti-Zionist Jew in the 1950s, from 1942 to 1955, and he wrote quite a bit. But during that period of time, right after the establishment state of Israel, he was probably the single most popular voice that people would know if you were to say anti-Zionist Jew in the U.S.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. My roommate just came home and wants to use the kitchen. So I'm going to get off and
Okay.
I appreciate you coming on.
No problem.
I hope I covered Bob and some of the other people. I just want to put it up my channel, have a little basic information, and this deserves more research, and I hope to have the time to do more research, but I wanted a little basic information up here about this because I have a lot of questions on it, and people should understand religious anti-Zionism, the history of Zionism, and the World War II connections, and till today you might see the connections between Israel and alt-right, right-wing nationalistic movements across Europe, or even the world, China and India, and history repeats itself. So at least have an hour or two, and we get Jonathan, the history professor, and thank you for coming on and sharing some of your wisdom.
All right, keep up the good work, David.
Okay, have a good night, everyone.
All right.